Hello, everybody. This is Ellen Sherritt, the Deputy Director at the Center on Great Teachers and Leaders. Welcome to the webinar, Voices from the Field, Learning Experiences with State Equity Plan Implementation. I'm delighted that you all have joined this webinar today. I personally see equity in education, and particularly equitable access to effective teachers, as the greatest civil rights challenge of our time. So we're really glad to have all of our presenters on the call today to share their experiences with this work and do what the Center on Great Teachers and Leaders sets out to do, which is really to connect states with one another to learn from each other's successes and ideas, as well as avoid possibly making similar mistakes and reinventing the wheel. We are at a very interesting and important time right now with the equity plan work. It's been 1 year since the plans were submitted, and we've seen a number of states begin implementation, in some cases with some exciting successes. We've also seen with the Every Student Succeeds Act some distractions from implementation, but these distractions at the same time are opportunities. As the regulations around SM take shape, it looks very, very likely that equity plans are indeed going to remain front and center as a piece of the consolidated state plans, and at the same time also promoting these plans as a meaningful backdrop for educator effectiveness work in your states is the recent media attention given to teacher shortages in all but 3 states. And we know that the teacher shortages that we're seeing most often are affecting poor and minority students the most. So we're really grateful that you are as interested as we all are in making sure that these equity plans are implemented and implemented effectively. And this webinar is intended to provide some guidance on how to do so. So do I have, is someone able to advance the slides? We're going to get right on that, pardon us. Great. Okay. Thank you. So, so joined with me here today is Dana Chambers, a senior TA consultant at the Center on Great Teachers and Leaders, and Dana has done a tremendous job taking the lead with doing this national scan of equity plan implementation. We also have Lynette Thompson from the Midwest Comprehensive Center, who's just been really so committed to helping advance the equity work over the last couple of years. And then from the Northeast Comprehensive Center, we have Kathy Dunn and Carol Kiersted, who have just really demonstrated tremendous leadership in supporting their states in equity plan development and implementation. So together, Kathy, Carol, and Lynette have really just, I think, paved the way for how regional centers can provide really substantive support in equity plan implementation. Then we have our state panelists, who we are delighted to have available to share their experiences with you today. We have Ivy Pfeiffer and Joan Leno from Arkansas, Jill Grubb from Ohio, Itai Mizrav from Washington, D.C., Robin Adair from Kentucky, Andrea Dixon-Seahorn from Missouri, Sheila Briggs from Wisconsin, Maria Stecker from Delaware, and Caitlin Beetson from Indiana. And as you'll see in this webinar, they've all taken unique and really exciting approaches to make sure that this work is successful. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kathy. You can see the pictures of our key presenters here Dana Chambers, Lynette Thompson, and Kathy. And Kathy is going to kick off the webinar with the description of the work that has been done to date to gather the information to share with you all.
Great. Thanks so much, Ellen. And welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. We're very excited to have this conversation with you. And this has grown out of the Northeast Equitable Access Collaborative for Technical Assistance, where we and all of our partners have come together to support the Northeast states in the design and the writing of their equity plans, and currently in the implementation of those plans. And as you can see on the screen, there are several key partners: the Center on Great Teachers and Leaders, the Council of Chief State School Officers, the National Center for Systemic Improvement, the Northeast Comprehensive Center, and our Regional Education Laboratory in the Northeastern Islands. And each one of those agencies and the staff who represent those agencies have been extraordinary in being true, fierce collaborative partners, which has made such an impact in terms of supporting our states. So a little bit about the process and purpose for today. Just by way of quick background, the original request for the data that the Great Teachers and Leaders Center gathered through the interviews that were held came out of a request from one of our states, Massachusetts, in the Northeast, where once they looked across several of the plans in their agency, they saw that equity and equitable access found its way into a lot of different areas, from school improvement to obviously their equitable access plans, their strategic plans. And it really begged the question for them, well, how are other states handling this issue where it's all over the place and in various places, and how are they managing for this? And so we put the request forward to the Great Teachers and Leaders Center, and they were amazing at identifying all the folks that are on the phone today as people who we could tap into, interview, and really learn from them in ways that we could then share with others. So it really, the purposes of this work are to inform the ongoing state equity plan implementation by sharing some of these early successes, and to provide an opportunity for state leaders to learn from each other, clearly the interviewees and all of you on the phone. There will be plenty of opportunity during this webinar for you to ask questions, and Dana will talk a little bit more about that in terms of our webinar structure.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dana Chambers, as Ellen introduced me. I want to tell you a little bit about the format of our webinar today. So we are going to be presenting the content of the interviews that we did with state panelists, but we're also going to be interspersing that presentation content with a number of interactive features. So first I should say that the webinar is going to be recorded, and it will be available on the GTL Center's website following the webinar. There's going to be designated Q&A time throughout the webinar. If you put your questions in the chat box, which should be in the sidebar of your webinar platform, Kathy will be facilitating that Q&A, and she will be passing along your questions that are state-specific to the SEA panelists that have joined us today. We will also be interspersing our presentation content with polls, which will appear on your screen to be able to answer. And then finally, at the end of the webinar, we'll be asking you to complete a brief feedback survey. We would really appreciate if you could take the time to complete the survey, as it helps us both to improve our work and the quality of our future events. This presentation is going to summarize the information gathered across 10 state education agency interviews, with overviews and specific state examples for each topic. These were need-sensing interviews that were conducted by request from the Northeast to learn more about state equity plan implementation. The interviews were organized into 4 topic categories that you see here. We asked interviewees how they organize and oversee the work of equity plan implementation within their SEA, including how the work is funded across the strategies. We also discussed how SEAs support districts in their equity plan implementation. We talked about how SEAs engage stakeholders to move the equity work forward, and we discussed some of the challenges and lessons learned during these early implementation phases. Finally, we also asked interviewees to share resources they use to support implementation. You'll see on the screen here a list of the participating states in our interviews, and I believe we have 8 states represented on the phone today. We're going to start off by talking about how the agencies prioritize the work of the equity plan implementation. Most of the states we spoke with are implementing all of the strategies indicated in year 1 of their equity plan, although some have decided to prioritize a subset of strategies for early implementation. Some strategies are further along in implementation than others. Many are expansions or improvements to existing strategies, and some strategies have gained more traction or been more effective than others. Some strategies actually require the passage of legislation, and if the legislation does not pass, those strategies may have been dropped or not yet addressed as states are working on alternate solutions. North Dakota has started with a subset of strategies and are doing the work in tiers. They have first prioritized 3 to 4 key strategies that they felt were timely and doable. They're focusing their efforts on addressing critical teacher shortages through marketing campaigns, loan forgiveness programs, signing bonuses, and a JET, Junior Elementary Teaching Program, where high school juniors and seniors go down to the elementary school to help teachers. While JET has been in operation for a long time in some places, North Dakota is now putting JET guidance in place to spread the program statewide. Kentucky sees the strategies as highly interdependent and is implementing them concurrently. They've emphasized the role of principals in establishing a positive school culture and the relationship between that culture and retaining teachers. They're also working toward diversifying the educator workforce, engaging in conversations with the NAACP and the Urban League to improve minority recruitment. DC has enjoyed some early successes with their implementation of a voluntary data collaborative, which was born when they realized they have federal reporting requirements that they sometimes were struggling to meet and which were sometimes linked with federal funds. To solve this issue, DC created the Voluntary Data Collaborative, where districts are incentivized to provide a lot of data because they get something in return. Under this collaborative, LEAs who participate no longer give any staffing data to the state. They give the data to an independent research partner. LEAs identify and report the data they feel are most important to staffing to the research partner. For example, educator effectiveness, preparation, licensure, compensation data. And then the research partner provides the district a report about what drives effectiveness and retention in the district. The preparation, certification scores, climate data. The research partner then only shares the federal reporting requirements with the state. So far they have 24 LEAs that serve 94% of DC students participating. As you can see here, SEAs situate the work in a variety of departments based on their internal organization. Equitable access cannot be addressed by one strategy or department alone. It needs to be comprehensive and therefore impacts and requires the engagement and investment from multiple departments. DC sees the equity plan as a school improvement tool focusing on the lowest performing schools. So they have the team that's responsible for school improvement leading the equity work. North Dakota situates the work within the Division of Student Support and Innovation, which is part of the Federal Title Programs Office. Delaware leads the work through their Teacher and Leader Effectiveness Unit, coordinating with their professional learning and technical assistance branches. Wisconsin's equity plan implementation is led by the Division for Academic Excellence at DPI, which houses licensing, educator effectiveness, and all of the content areas. Ohio's Office of Federal Programs is a key support to the Center for the Teaching Profession in implementing the equity plan at the local level. States also noted that they typically have one key point of contact coordinating cross-department efforts, and this is the most effective way they've found to manage the work. Arkansas organizes the strategies into 3 categories: attract and prepare, develop, support, and retain, and utilize existing resources. North Dakota has a co-leadership structure that is hiring a new staff member that will have equity work as a dedicated part of their portfolio. The Office of Educator Effectiveness in Ohio has primary leadership for the state's equity plan, but each strategy in the plan has a unique individual lead, either internal or external to the agency. We found that overall, states are engaged in equity plan implementation without the support of additional funding. Funding for each particular strategy varies, with some leveraging existing funds for strategies that have been expanded or refined, and others sending funds to districts for local implementation. Generally, states are interested to learn more about how ESSA funding can support equity plan strategy implementation. One of Arkansas's key strategies is to leverage existing resources by improving strategies already in place, which has minimized the additional funding needs. California's local control funding formula provides districts with grade span specific based grants to use at their discretion, plus supplemental and concentration grants that are calculated based on student demographic factors and targeted at certain student populations. Because Delaware made progress in educator effectiveness initiatives over the last 5 years, the equity plan is largely the same as their overall effectiveness strategic plans. And because of this, there is no real separate funding structure or budget allocation. Missouri has integrated the work of the equity plan into the larger EQ budget. They're using existing EQ resources based on what they think is important. And Indiana's 2014 budget bill established a $2 million Excellence in Performance grant to be administered by their Department of Ed. They've leveraged this grant to support things related to their equity plan strategies. I'm going to turn it over to Kathy to administer our first poll and series of Q&A based on the content that we just presented.
Great, thank you, Dana. So at this point, folks, we're going to give you a couple of polls. The first one is here. And please indicate which department or office in your SEA or the SEA you work with manages the equity plan implementation. This poll is for attendees only, and if you could please indicate by clicking on the radio button as soon as you have all responded. We'll close the poll and show you the results. Following this poll, we've got one more quick poll to show you too. It seems like a lot of you are finding that the Educator Quality or Effectiveness Office is a key place, followed by the Title II or Federal Programs Office, and about a quarter of you are saying it's in more than one office. Again, if you could please just indicate, it looks like most of you have responded. We'll be closing the poll shortly, so if you haven't responded so far, please do. Just a few seconds left, and then Jessica will demonstrate, show you the results of the poll. Terrific. Thank you all very, very much. So it looks like we've heard from most everybody, I think, and here are the results. So as you can see, the Educator Quality and Effectiveness Office is about half of you, and then pretty much half of you are in Title II or federal programs, and then several in more than one office. That's in fact what we found happening in our Northeast states as well. Thank you so much, Jessica. So another quick poll for you is here coming up, where we'd like to know a little bit about how your state funds equity plan implementation. And please select just one of the following. Whether it's a dedicated stream or existing funds, grant funding, or you've not identified a funding source yet. Looks like we've got almost everybody, I think, have clicked in. Thank you all very, very much. Just a few more seconds, and we will see how this frames out. Thank you all for about half of you. And while the rest of you are responding, just to let you know that following this quick poll, you're going to have an opportunity to ask questions of our panelists. As you know from Ellen's introduction, we have several folks from 8 states, Arkansas, Ohio, District of Columbia, Kentucky, Missouri, Wisconsin, Delaware, and Indiana. And you have heard a little bit so far in terms of the presentation that Dana has shared with you. So please think about questions that you have, either in general or of a particular panelist. And looking at the results from your poll, that at least half of you have existing educator quality and effectiveness funds, a third has not identified a funding source, and 13% from grant funding. I think it's true that funding was one of the key challenges that I know some of our states in the Northeast found as well. So let's go to our Q&A with the panelists. And what we'd like to invite you to do here is in the chat window, please select or identify any questions that you have of our panelists, and once you have populated some questions, I'll take a look at those and we will ask specific panelists to respond to you. So just take a minute and think about something that at this juncture in our webinar that would be helpful for you to either hear more about, further clarification on, or perhaps you have something you'd like to share in terms of what's been talked about so far in terms of how it plays out in your state. So again, we're not using the raising hand feature here. We are going to use the questions in the chat window. So if you could indicate any questions that you do have, that would be wonderful. So let's take a few more seconds and generate a couple of questions. So we're not having many questions so far. I guess I'd like to at this point invite and open up to any of the panelists in addition to what Dana has said so far. Oh, we have one question. Let me pause on that. The question from Carrie White is, how do you keep everyone on the same page when organizing the work across several departments and units? So either any of the panelists, please feel free to respond. Let's go with Sheila Briggs from Wisconsin. Could you share how it plays out in Wisconsin in response to Carrie's question?
Yes, I'd be happy to. Can you hear me just fine?
You can. Thanks, Sheila.
Sure. So I haven't really done anything too magical, but I have a few strategies that have worked for us in Wisconsin. We have an internal team at the department that is all working towards supporting the districts that are in our equity plan. And one of the things I did at the very beginning is I have been using a Google Smart Sheet with them. And so we have all of the action steps that we are responsible for in the equity plan outlined as a line item in a smart sheet that all of our internal teams have access to. And so that's been very effective for us in being able to, throughout our busy days, all have access to the work that we've agreed to be doing. And then obviously I've coupled that with regular meetings, bringing them together to check in on that, talk about any issues that are coming up, and keep us all on the same page with the work that we're moving forward. So that's been the group that's primarily been helping plan the series of webinars that we've provided for the districts, as well as the face-to-face meetings that we've had with the districts that we're working directly with on the equity plan. And so that's kind of how we've kept on the same page. One last thing I would say is that we've also been very careful to not have them all reaching out independently to the districts we're working with in the equity plan. So all of that is being filtered through me so that the districts know that they have one point of contact from the agency around equity plan requests and information. And I think that's been helpful in keeping us on the same page so that we're sure there aren't lots of different messages coming out from lots of different departments. So that's worked well for Wisconsin.
Terrific. Thanks a lot, Sheila. And I'm just wondering, Itai, if you might share, in terms of your work in DC, any creative ways that you found to leverage ESSA funding to support the equity work?
Hey everyone. So as Dana mentioned in the beginning, from the very beginning, we treated it as part of a larger school improvement effort. We've done the engagement around writing the plan, together with the engagement about writing a new SEA waiver that deals with school improvement for the main part. And most of our work is aligned with efforts like state intervention in low-performing schools, SIG, grant program, because we understand that no strategy is ever going to work without great teachers to implement it at the school, and they are the most important resources for school improvement. So that's why we're kind of doing it jointly, and that allows us to look at the wider scope of available resources and available people and available departments and available grants that kind of all fits in the same goal, which is improve those schools. And to get to school improvement, we want to get better teachers, or improve instruction, or improve working conditions or leadership within those really high-need schools that, sadly, in DC, those are the same schools that are also high poverty and high minority. So I think that kind of alignment between those two things helps us in that sense.
That's terrific. Thanks, Itai. And Ivy, I know that in Arkansas, you've been working on a strategic planning process to bring multiple divisions or departments together. Could you say a little bit about that, share that with the group?
Yes. We are, our agency is engaging in a strategic planning mission. And so it was perfect timing in helping us to bring in the entire department in common work and really getting us out of our silos. So while the Equitable Access Initiative really started within my division, we've now really engaged our unit of school improvement, our federal programs office, our professional development unit, and our team leaders are working together on a daily basis. So I really, it's just been a very nice complement to the work that was started with the Equitable Access Initiative, but now it is becoming part of a long-term strategic plan for our entire agency. So we feel very good about how we're going to be moving forward.
That's terrific. Thanks so much, Ivy. So thanks all. And so at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Lynette to continue the presentation.
Sure. So now we're going to shift to our next key area of focus, which is stakeholder engagement and state implementation challenges. So to ensure that the work has traction and is implemented across departments and agencies, it's critical to garner support and feedback from stakeholders. We know that states across the country engage stakeholders in equity plan development, but we also asked states we spoke with about how they continue to engage stakeholders during equity plan implementation as well. These efforts have manifested in several ways, including development of a task force or committee, focus groups, and surveys. Several states noted that they plan to revisit stakeholder engagement as implementation continued and refocus their efforts. California Department of Education is conducting presentations of the equity plan and garnering stakeholder feedback at major conferences throughout the state. At each conference, the California Department of Ed and the GTL Center present the state plan, including state data, identified root causes for the inequitable access to excellent educators, and strategies to address the root causes. And then participants have an opportunity to provide their input regarding the prioritization of the strategies and suggest new strategies or new root causes. And then the state is compiling all the feedback into a database. In Missouri, they're engaged in ongoing equity labs with stakeholders to support in-depth conversations about data and the equity plan development. These labs include an overview of the equity work, conversations with stakeholders about state data trends in equity and the extent to which they're reflected at the district level, and information on the process of developing an equity plan. Districts then go about to develop their own equity plans following participation in the labs, and will come back for the end of this summer to revisit their plans. Missouri also co-hosted a rural equity mini-conference, rural educational equity mini-conference in the spring with the Central Comprehensive Center, or C3, as the Midwest Equity Assistance Center and a regional higher education institution also collaborated to highlight equity issues and think about what changes are necessitated in districts and IHEs to close equity gaps. In addition, we have three other state examples. In North Dakota, they've actively engaged in teacher recruitment and retention task force. They're key champions of the work. The task force comprised North Dakota education leaders across a wide range of SEA departments, professional organizations, preparation institutions, district leaders, and teachers and principals. The task force has reviewed data on teacher retention and recruitment, vetted teacher candidates to fill vacancies, and put together a multifaceted marketing campaign to promote the teaching profession. As part of their engagement efforts, the NCC is putting together a series of short videos taken with phone cameras to highlight success stories. NCC did one of these to highlight the first set of 5 meetings done by the task force in 2015 to 16. Those videos are online if participants are interested in seeing those examples. Arkansas partnered with SCCC and the GTL Center to launch a statewide tour of focus groups designed to better understand the perceived causes of teacher shortages, the ways in which districts use data in HR planning, and how districts might strategically use predictive shortage data to prevent future shortages. They use this information to inform development of an educator shortage predictor model this past winter and are currently engaging stakeholders in a second round of focus groups this spring to gather feedback on the first round of data. In Indiana, the State Department collaborated with their outreach coordinators that work specifically with their highest need schools and districts to share the strategies proposed within the equity plan and identify schools that are engaging in promising practices that support recruitment and retention. Holding an upcoming summit for teacher leaders and educator preparation program leads who are part of the initial stakeholder group is another activity that Indiana is engaged in. States also shared that they felt that stakeholder engagement efforts had broadened support for the work outside of the SEA, and they shared a number of different organization types that continue to support their implementation efforts. Some of the states did note that they felt they needed additional stakeholder buy-in to effectively push this work forward. In Missouri, they noted that their support starts at State Board of Directors. They also have strong support from C3 and MWEAC, higher education, K-12 educators, and active participation from professional associations and community partners. Kentucky noted that the commissioner's support has been key, along with many Kentucky professional organizations and family and children organizations. They formed a partnership with the Education Standards Board as well, and since certification lies outside of the department. For California, CACC and GTL have been very critical for implementation support. They also have support from many critical friends through the many equity-focused community organizations in California. There were many common themes across states related to challenges in implementation, although the work still remains a priority for states regardless of these challenges. Several states noted that finding time to do the work well is always a challenge. California noted a challenge with increasing the diversity of the workforce and sending new teachers into schools where they lack cultural context to effectively support students. They also have the challenge of the wide and varied number of stakeholders across the state. They can't always address all the feedback that they're given. Kentucky noted that as they move forward to share impact of recruitment and retention with districts, it requires a cultural shift in how they look at personnel and placement of teachers with the right kids. Districts need to consider the happiness of teachers versus the needs of students and effectively communicate why equity matters. DC explained that the charge for closing equity gaps requires the state to look at differences between students of high and low poverty, between neighborhoods, and between schools of different demographics, regardless of their sector, being public or public charter, and ensure that every student has access to a great teacher. This raises questions between the balance between the state responsibility that would require data collection and implementation of state strategies with the education community's will and agreement to maximize and guard the autonomy of the charter schools. This is why, for example, they are doing a voluntary data initiative rather than a required one, which would have gotten the state to 100% of schools. Delaware faces pressures for equal instead of equitable funding. In some places, this has struggled to target resources on high-need schools. There are also some districts where talent management is not seen as priority. The General Assembly in Indiana passed a bill last year that placed restrictions on state data collection, which has posed challenges for implementation of some of the equity plan strategies. States often presented possible solutions for overcoming the challenges of implementation. Some states are increasing their efficiency by leveraging existing work that has momentum going already. Others have found ways to incentivize or otherwise encourage districts to share data through built-in annual reporting or monitoring processes. Some states have come to the regional centers and the GTL Center for implementation support. GTL is a suite of project management, implementation, communications, and monitoring tools that can be used to support state efforts.
Hi, folks. Thank you so much. Yes, thanks, Lynette. So again, a very quick poll. Lynette just shared a lot of great information from our states. What about you? What challenges or barriers has your state or the state that you're working with faced in implementing your equity plan? Select one or more of the following. You can select all that apply. So just take a minute and fill in which ones are most germane to you, and again, you can click all that apply. Clearly, time and resources, for all of us is a key issue, as you're indicating here. We'd love to hear from all of you, all the attendees, for this quick poll, and we're going to have another minute or so to give you a chance to chime in. And following this quick poll, we're going to you will have an opportunity for another question and answer with panelists to learn from them about how they have dealt with some of the challenges in their states. And you'll have an opportunity to ask them directly, as well as to identify anything that you found that's successful. And like before, we will use the chat feature so that you can record your questions. I will take a look at those, and then we'll field the questions of the panelists. So about half of you have voted. We'd love to hear from as many of you as possible before we close the poll. Clearly, the lack of time and resources is the number one. And then accessing necessary data. I know in the Northeast, our states find that it's, not only accessing the necessary data, but sometimes the data doesn't exist. And so trying to figure out data systems to get the information that's needed is one thing I know in the Northeast our states have been dealing with. So we're going to take a few more seconds Thank you so much, everyone. And as you can see, but we heard from about 54% of you, and almost all of you indicated that lack of time and resources, including funding, is one of the biggest issues, with, again, accessing the necessary data as another key one. Engaging districts to do the groundwork is one that a few of you mentioned, and lack of stakeholder buy-in. I know we found in the Northeast that engaging districts is, of course, the main story, and it's the funding and resources that we need. So let's go to Q&A for a couple of minutes and ask you again what questions that you have of our panelists regarding challenges that they have faced in their implementation efforts, and how they've worked to overcome the challenges in ways that they, can have impact. And also, what, if any, questions do you have about stakeholder engagement? So we've listed a couple of example questions here. I'll wait a few more seconds to hear from you, but we really like to know what is it that you would like to learn more about with regard to successful meeting of challenges, so that those challenges don't continue to become barriers. I'll wait a few more seconds. All right, well, we'll give you a few more seconds to generate, but in the meantime, Jill Grubb from Ohio, would you please share with us some of the ways that Ohio has dealt with some of the challenges that you face? So first of all, what are the challenges, and what are ways that you've successfully overcome them, or at least begin to overcome them? Jill, are you with us? Jill? All right, let's, Andrea Dixon-Seahorn from Missouri, could you share some of your successes with us?
Hi everyone, this is Andrea with the state of Missouri, and not quite sure we've experienced the successes, but it is definitely a work in progress. And I would say the biggest issue is, as mentioned by 90% of you on the poll today, and that's just the time and the resources. So our goal is to really maximize the moment when we set the time, particularly for our equity committees, which are, they first of all consist of a number of stakeholders from across the state, various levels, professional associations, teachers, school leaders, district officials. And so we try to maximize the moment when we do come together. So far we have held 2 of 4 scheduled equity committees, and so they are scheduled for a 4-hour time frame. And so our goal is that when they do all come to the table, that everyone is providing their input and their insight as we address really 4 critical issues centered around teacher shortages, urban education, diverse educators, and teacher incentives. So again, as I mentioned, it's a work in progress, but we do try to make people feel that their time is valuable, and we at least feed them lunch. That always helps when they do come to the table.
Terrific. Thanks, Andrea. And Kevin Draper, thanks for your question. Kevin's question, and I'll put this out to all the panelists, how are states working to address equity at the local level with regard to small community charter schools and small urbans, perhaps with K-12 in one building? So any of you can unmute if you would like to. Robert, how about let's start with you. How would you respond, or how have you dealt with this issue in Kentucky? Robin, I'm sorry, not Robert.
Okay, it took me a second there to unmute. Well, I think in Kentucky, one of the big challenges for us and what we've been working to try to overcome is strong communication, especially with all of our different stakeholder groups. We have a number of grant programs that are connected to the department that are going on. For example, we have a Network to Transform Teaching. And what we have found is that if we can communicate the goals of equitable access in a way that can really motivate and sort of inspire people, they're more likely to get on board. And so I think much of the work that we're already doing
relates back to equity, and part of that is just helping to communicate that clearly and to get our stakeholders to see their role in that. And so for us, good communication has led to collaboration in a lot of ways. And so we do have many stakeholders out there. But I think that the poll number that came back is really typical of what's going on in Kentucky as well.
You mean, Jill, Robin, excuse me, in terms of the funding and resource issue?
Well, the funding and resource issue, but maybe it was the previous poll. One of them that was, or someone was mentioning about having strong communication across the whole agency.
Mm-hmm.
You have one division or one office that's working on equity and another division that's sort of feeding into it a little bit but not necessarily feeling ownership of it. Sometimes it's hard to get everybody kind of pulling in the same direction and understanding equity in the same way. And so I think that whenever we've gone out to communicate with districts and partners, and we have helped them to get a really good understanding of what we mean by equitable access, it's something that teachers and administrators can really buy into and believe in.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that there's just a gap between the title of equitable access and then actually getting a deep understanding of the work that we're trying to do. I think everybody in Kentucky wants every student to have access to a great teacher and a great leader in their school.
For sure. Yeah, I think the communication is such an important issue, and I know in the Northeast, and we were just out at the national conference with the GTL Center out in Texas, and I think this issue comes up all the time. Both having a plan for communication is so important, and then reminding ourselves of the great tools like the communication tool developed by the GTL is so helpful in identifying and anticipating the questions that are helpful to answer and deal with prior to getting to the place where we say, oops, we need to communicate with folks. It sounds like you're doing a great job of that, Robin. Thank you.
Well, Kathy, one other comment that I wanted to make when you were talking about a plan is that we have had several convenings to pull together different partners who are really interested in equitable access, and we've worked with logic models that have to do with teacher quality, and that's such an important part of that. And so I think that's another good strategy, is to pull together the people who are working on this project and who value equitable access, and to really think through with a logic model or a work plan or something like that, how you really want to tackle the different pieces of the work.
Terrific. Yes, thank you so much. I'd like to go back before we continue our presentation to the poll that we just did, where most every one of you said that leveraging funding and resources and time, of course, was such an issue. And Maria, I'd like to ask you in Delaware, how have you dealt with that issue? It's clearly one that we all have, and it's age-old. And just wondered what strategies you've used that you found might not have dealt with the whole problem, but at least you're finding more forward progress.
I think it's a good question. So specifically on the funding front, I think that I don't have an answer for what's been successful. I can tell you what we're going to try to do. So a number of initiatives that we were trying to implement, all of this equity work was really happening at the end of our Race to the Top grant. So most of the initiatives were currently being funded by the state in our different strategy areas. And now with all of our work, we're having some pretty difficult conversations about what's going to continue to be funded by the state, and then what schools and districts can use some of their federal dollars to provide. So I think that we're starting to really try to think about having these conversations with districts about better utilizing their Title IIA dollars for some of this work. I don't know if I have great answers to the question at this point, but I know that we're beginning to think about how we'll tackle this all moving forward in a new world.
Terrific. Thank you so much. And so at this point, I'd like to turn it back to Dana to continue our presentation.
Thanks, Kathy. So states are working with districts in a variety of ways to support equity plan implementation. There are many states operating in local control environments where they have limited authority. While a few states require participation, several have found ways to incentivize participation through annual reporting or monitoring requirements. Some states are prioritizing support to the highest need districts in order to focus their efforts where support is needed most. Ohio is in the process of developing a guidance document to assist LEAs in the local equitable access planning process. The process includes reviewing data to determine equity gaps, conducting a root cause analysis, and determining strategies most likely to impact local equity gaps. Wisconsin discussed their process for engaging LEAs through a series of voice-over webinar homework assignments prior to bringing them into an all-day face-to-face meeting to develop local equity plans. The webinars led the LEAs through establishing a local team, analyzing their data, and beginning to draft a plan. LEA participation is voluntary in Arkansas. They use a skill-will matrix to determine the type of support offered to districts for implementation. They prioritize the highest need districts first. In cases where the superintendent is supportive of the equity work and connected with principals, districts are further along in the work. In cases where a district leader is supportive but lacks capacity for implementation, Arkansas can provide some additional support around processes and implementation, but there continues to be a sustainability challenge beyond that initial support. North Dakota is a local controlled state, and the SEA has limited authority over schools and districts. They see their role as providing TA and guidance with no real mechanisms in place to require things of LEAs. However, they are able to require LEAs to report on equity efforts and progress through their annual consolidated applications for local funding. Districts must take the work from there, and have so far been very receptive when they completed this process for the first time last August. Kentucky integrates equity participation into their annual statewide monitoring and includes an equity diagnostic in their school and district improvement plans. We'll turn it back over to Kathy for some Q&A.
Great. Thanks, Dana. So again, thinking about what you're hearing, questions that you now have with regarding how SEAs have supported district development and implementation of equity plans to help the districts really think about what it means at that level, which is, of course, where it all happens. So what would be helpful to you to hear more about from any of our panelists? Again, please use the chat feature to identify, write your question, and we can connect you to a specific panelist. Jill Grubb from Ohio, I know you were finally unmuted. I think we had a little tech problem before. I think you can, hopefully you can speak now, and maybe you could respond from Ohio's perspective that, you know, what have you found helpful in supporting districts in the development and implementation of equity plans?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
All right. I've got Cheryl Crone here with me, and she's been working directly on the documents that we've been rolling out to districts. So I'm going to let Cheryl.
Sure.
Yeah. And basically what's helped us, I think, is, you know, we've had kind of open communication to our districts about, you know, the new equity planning requirements within their consolidated application. So that's helped a lot in kind of getting the word out that there is new planning, and along with that, you know, we created a bunch of different documents and resources that can help guide them through this process. And we're also going to do like a narrated PowerPoint with videos to walk them through the process. So we've really offered a lot of guidance, technical assistance. You know, we have a mailbox that we can directly answer questions with our local districts. And we've also got our Office of Federal Programs on board, so I trained the whole office on how to answer questions around local equity planning. So we have a nice cadre of people to really give specific guidance and help as locals start engaging in this process in Ohio.
Terrific. Thanks a lot, Jill. And Karen Butterfield, thanks for your question. So the question is for Missouri, Andrea, and the question is, they would like, Karen would like to have a little bit more detail as to the equity labs that you do use with districts. How often do they occur? What are they like? etc. Could you speak a little bit more about that, please?
Absolutely. Can everyone hear me?
I can.
I'm having some technical, wonderful. I'm having some technical difficulties. So our equity labs have been quite successful. As of now, we have had 2 cohort groups go through the equity labs. The first one was held in January, and at that first one, we were able to really attract, if you will, 8 districts: suburban, rural, urban, and even a charter school. It was completely voluntary, and we basically just shared with those districts the Missouri plan. We also explored some sample district data, looked at some root causes for the inequities in the data, and just talked about some possible strategies for ensuring equitable access to excellent educators. And then we were able to really help them begin the process of building their own framework for the development of a district equity plan. And that was brought about through our partnership with GTL. They provided the templates that are available in the implementation playbook. And so those district representatives were able to walk away with that information to begin the conversations on their own home front. So we have now, since that time, had a follow-up to that first cohort group and have also since held a second cohort group, which consisted of 4 additional districts. So now we've worked with 12, and again, completely voluntary. We're hoping that this will become contagious. So as those 12 districts talk to their partnering districts and colleagues about their newly developed district equity plans, that this will gain momentum throughout the state, particularly over this next school year.
Terrific. Thanks so much. Sheila, I know, going back to you for a second, in Wisconsin, you've, I think, at the point where you're having LEAs submit written plans. Could you elaborate a little bit on that and kind of share with us how you got to that point, what you're finding in terms of as the plans are coming in?
Sure. As we did our webinars, kind of giving them all of the background information that they needed and all of the information that we wanted them to have as they started thinking about root causes and starting moving towards action steps that they could take to change the situation in their districts to be more equitable. When we brought them together in the face-to-face meeting, we designed that as a very workshop type setting so that they had their teams there and they could start digging in and writing plans. So we had them writing up, and we just developed a template for them, but we were very, very open and loose about how they wanted to do it, because our #1 goal was for it to be meaningful for them so that it would actually cause change in their local district. So we had them analyze their own individual data that we provided to them and discuss, you know, what they were seeing and write about that, as well as what they thought the root causes were based on their data and their findings, and then to design action steps that they could take. So these root causes ranged from leadership turnover that might be causing great staff turnover, issues with behavior in a school that would cause lots of teacher turnover, generating lots of inexperienced or out-of-field teachers, those a whole wide range of things. And so then we asked them to develop a list of strategies that they were going to be implementing, as well as their own determination for how they were going to be measuring success. And then we offered support to them based upon what they're writing in their plans. There's some similarities. We're dealing with lots of teacher shortage issues, as many other states are. That's coming through loud and clear in their plans, so some licensing things they're working on. And we still have plans rolling in. We gave them a soft deadline of June 1st, where we said we were going to be taking a snapshot of those plans as they were, so that we had something for accountability with the feds, even though we haven't really heard exactly what's going to be required of us. But told them that we wanted the plans to be fluid and ongoing and adjustable and flexible, because we don't want them to be something they turn in and then put on a shelf. And so we'll be revisiting that with them this fall on implementation of their plans.
Terrific. Very helpful. Thanks so much, Sheila. We appreciate that. So at this point, I'd like to turn it back to you, Lynette, for the last leg of our presentation.
So states, as we've heard them individually talk about, states noted challenges in local district implementation efforts, including varied capacity, local control issues, and varied buy-in from different localities. North Dakota noted that they haven't had a lot of significant barriers to the work since their state put federal requirements into state law when NCLB was first enacted. But they have experienced some challenges with the small but vocal group of anti-Common Core and anti-testing groups who oppose data collection efforts. There's multiple bills in the state legislature that limit the amount of data the state can collect beyond what is federally required. And then kind of back to Sheila, a few Wisconsin districts had initially questioned the accuracy of state-level data, and that impacted their buy-in and local implementation plan timelines. But Sheila's team in Wisconsin worked closely with districts to explain some of the changes in data tracking and helped reluctant districts to understand it's not really about getting off the list. It's about everybody exploring their data and looking at gaps, inequities, and root causes. So although that was initially a challenge, the state and LEAs have really moved past that and moved into implementation. California noted challenge of state size and disseminating information and messaging effectively to 300,000 plus teachers, as well as finding strategies that can address such a wide range of different needs. Despite these challenges, states have been really creative in the ways that they approach the work and have come up with strategies to overcome these barriers. You've heard through the presentation some of the strategies that states have used to overcome these challenges, such as incentivizing participation, dedicating more time to stakeholder engagement, and differentiating support to districts based on need. And also reaching out to RCCs and GTL for implementation support and resources. In this next slide, you'll see here that states noted a variety of types of resources and support structures that have aided their implementation, with the most common type of support being partner support from RCCs, GTL, and SN. Many states noted that they hope to see some clearer guidance on ESSA requirements related to equity to help them better understand how they'd be expected to monitor and report equity plan implementation and progress. Several states also noted a desire to have more opportunities to collaborate with one another as it relates to equity plan implementation. Back to Kathy.
Great, thanks so much, Lynette. So Lynette, our last quick poll with regard to resources to support implementation. I'd like to know what types of resources have you found most valuable in supporting you in the equity plan implementation work. And again, you can select all that apply. If you select other, it would be great if in the chat window you could indicate what you have found, what other resources you have found to be most helpful. So we'll take a few minutes, give you a chance to think about this, and that's great. Thank you so much as you come in. And following this quick poll, you're going to have an opportunity in the chat bar to use that feature to indicate what types of resources would be most helpful to you moving forward. We really want to follow up from this webinar to think about resources that would be most helpful to you. About a third of you have had an opportunity to vote. We're going to take another minute or so. Love to hear from as many of you as possible, as always. Sounds like there's fairly equal distribution in these top three, that the direct technical assistance from the center partners, online resources, and the ESON workshops, or work groups rather, and communities of practice have been helpful. So again, just almost half of you have had an opportunity. If you could just quickly indicate what would be most helpful or what has been most helpful to you, and then start to think about, as you go forward, what would be most helpful to you, what types of resources in particular, and we'll share with you some examples. But half of you have voted. We're going to take just a few more seconds and then we'll close the poll and see the results as you have voted in. So Jessica, maybe I think we could close the poll. Thank you. And as we see, again, equal distribution for the most part in terms of these top three. And probably one or two of you, or three of you, have identified other. It would be interesting if you in the chat feature could say what are the resources. Thank you for that. So now we'd like to give you an opportunity again in the chat bar feature to think about what types of resources of support would you might find most useful going forward. And here are some examples. Clearly the direct TA support from your regional comprehensive center or the Great Teachers and Leaders National Center. Additional guidance on equity as it relates to ESSA. This question, of course, is one that came up a lot in our recent meeting hosted by the GTL out in Texas. Resources to support stakeholder engagement, project management, monitoring and improvement, data collection and analysis. We'd love to just hear from you which of these or other resources would be most useful. Think that people are indicating as this work rolls out, there's so many things that, you know, there are things out there that either people might not know of, but things that might be created that could be most useful. As soon as we hear from folks, we will gather information. And also just want to apologize. I know that sometimes it's a little awkward format, but we hope that you're able to use these features to identify. So thanks, Teresa Burgess. So direct guidance from and technical assistance from the Regional Comprehensive Center as equity relates to ESSA. Yes, again, another from Deborah Maibaum, ESSA. And Dina Durish is not able to see the chat window, so Jessica, maybe you could reach out to Dina and help her with that. Kathy Reedy, thanks. The support for the data collection and analysis. Be interesting, Kathy, to know more about what kind of support. Is it just technically gathering and analyzing data, or is it identifying data that in addition to data sources you typically think about, or data sources that you might wish to have that don't currently exist? Be nice to know a little bit more about that. And love to hear from a few more of you if we can. So yes, Maria Stecker, good to hear from you in Delaware. How ESSA requirements and equity requirements align and what remains separate. I think that is a great point in terms of I think the jury's out. We're still waiting to, you know, see some guidance. Jessica or Whitney, one of you, Linda Johnson, is also unable to see the chat room. If you could reach out to Linda, that would be great. Take a few more seconds to hear from you. So I think what we'll do is we'll advance to the next slide and take a look and have this opportunity to ask additional questions of the panelists with regard to what questions you have with regard to implementation. As we're waiting to see what populates in the question chat window, Caitlin Bateson from Indiana, I'd like to ask you if you could reflect on a couple of things, sort of building on the last question that we were talking about in terms of how you found ways that have been successful in Indiana to support local education agencies in their equity plan implementation, equity work. That would be great to hear from you.
Problem, and I apologize, I've lost my voice, so bear with me. No, that's okay. I do want to mention, and I'm not sure which panelist earlier talked about kind of aligning with some of the other divisions in their department that work to support those highest poverty and highest minority student populations. And that's kind of the approach that we've started to take. And so we have a division called Outreach for School Improvement. And we also have a division that works with our school improvement grant schools. And so we are now meeting and collaborating to ensure that we communicate information to those specific schools that are already receiving support in other areas. We're kind of using some of that overlap to start reaching out to those specific schools where we're identifying gaps. And like many other states, we're focused really on looking at educator retention for those teachers that have been rated effective and highly effective within our state's evaluation system. So I would say that we're still definitely in the beginning stages of making that contact, but our approach has been at the beginning to just really introduce the plan, walk them through the gaps that were identified and why they have been sort of targeted for support. And then we've also started sharing just on our website some resources that are aligned directly with specific strategies within our equity plan. So kind of these major strategy areas, one is bolstering mentoring and induction programs. So we are gathering resources and research around that topic and then pushing that out through our website as well. So it's kind of a combination of approaches to communicating with the schools and districts. We too have very little authority in terms of requiring LEA level development of their own plans. So again, that's why we've kind of worked to tack on with some of the other areas that are tied to other federal funding so that there is a little bit more accountability for their participation. Does that address what you were hoping for?
Yeah, no, it's very helpful. And just a different question, if I may, and if your voice can stand it. You know, when we think about talent management, we think about preparation, recruitment, retention, and ongoing support, of course, right? That's part of this conversation. And just wondering how you in your state in Indiana have or are addressing the preparation part, you know, working with institutions of higher ed, colleges, universities, with regard to your equitable access goals.
Great question. So we actually do mention preparation very briefly in our plan and focused more on retention once they're teaching, because we looked at those effectiveness ratings, which we can't necessarily, you know, match all of those with educator preparation programs. However, our state superintendent really, you know, is a champion of the equity work and has created what she calls our Blue Ribbon Commission on Educator Recruitment and Retention. And I lead that as well. And what her goal was to kind of extend and build upon the equity plan and look at the entire continuum all the way down to high school level courses that are sort of introduction to education professions or cadet teaching courses, and then look at educator preparation programs and look at our enrollment and completion rates and the changes in those rates over the past few years. And then moving forward, looking at those first couple of years, what we call the induction period, the teacher's first couple of years teaching, and then career, which we've considered to be kind of the rest of their career as classroom teachers, but also teacher leaders. And so through that commission, which is comprised of all, you know, teacher leaders and currently practicing administrators, our various associations, superintendents, principals. We've also got other state agencies like the Commission for Higher Education, and also state legislators that participate. It's about 50 members, and we met with them 6 times face-to-face last year and identified, similar as we did within our equity plan, kind of several strategy areas and then individual recommendations within each area to improve upon educator preparation programs, for example, so that we are not only looking at retention and increasing teacher retention, but increasing our numbers in enrolling and completing those preparation programs, and ensuring then that those teachers are truly prepared and supported once they enter the field. So through that commission for recruitment and retention, that's kind of how we've built onto the equity plan to address the larger continuum. And we've included our, at the department, our coordinator of educator preparation and also our coordinator of educator licensure in that work.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Caitlin. I hope your voice gets better. At this point, I'd like to pass it back to Dana, who will share some closing points and next steps.
Thanks, Kathy. So following the webinar, we're going to be sending you a survey link to find out more about how we can best support your work. You can also use this survey to tell us if you'd like to be connected with other states to talk about equity implementation. And you'll see my email and Lynette's email up on the screen. If there's a question you think of for us or for any of the panelists, feel free to shoot us an email and we'll connect you with the person who might be able to best answer your question. There'll be a recording of this webinar and a PDF of the slide deck on GTL's website. We'll be sending that to participants later on. And we'd also like to just take a minute to share and highlight a few implementation resources that are available online. The GTL Center has developed an implementation playbook. This is a suite of implementation and project management resources that's really issue agnostic. It could be used both for equity plan implementation or more broadly for implementing other strategies or initiatives in your state or district. It includes tools related to communication, monitoring, stakeholder engagement, and thinking about coherence across initiatives. You may want to check those out. The link that down there is at the bottom. You can also find it by Googling Implementation Playbook and GTL Center. Essen has also developed some resources around equitable access plans, as has Weston. So we encourage you to reach out if you'd like to learn more about these resources, or if you're interested in receiving more direct support from us or your regional center partners. And so that's about all we have for today. We will be closing out, and you'll be seeing a link pushed out to you regarding the follow-up survey. And thank you so much for everybody's time and participation, and a big thank you, of course, to our state panelists who both took the time to speak with us about the great work that they're doing, but also have taken time out of their schedules to join us to answer questions. We hope that this collaboration will be able to continue for states to speak with each other and network to support their state's efforts in equity plan implementation. Thank you very much. Have a great afternoon.